Hello and welcome to CollectaThoughts, the show where I collect my thoughts on video games. And today we're going to be talking about Shin Megame Tensei 5. And I have to say this, of course, so you don't get the wrong idea here, but this isn't really going to be a traditional review. I'm not going to go too in-depth into the mechanics of this game, but more of my experience with it and also my enjoyment, I guess. And Shin Megame Tensei 5 is an interesting one for me specifically because while I have never reviewed any of the SMT games here on the channel, I've actually played through 3, which is Nocturne, and 4 while I was already doing reviews for this channel. And one of the reasons I never did a review for it was because I really didn't want to have to do a more traditional type of review for it, which was what I was doing back then, and have to explain all of the mechanics of Shin Megame Tensei games, because it is a complex game in terms of JRPGs. But because this is CollectaThought, I can just be like, hey, it's complicated Pokemon. It really is, when you boil it down to it though, with status effects actually meaning something, and type advantages, which is, the rock, paper, scissors gameplay, being crucial to progression, and especially here in SMT5, since one of the things I found was that bosses have giant health bars. I don't know if anyone is feeling this way. Obviously, if you're watching this video, maybe you haven't played it yet, but I'm saying in my experience, even compared to other SMT games, bosses had really large health bars. What this means for the gameplay though, in my experience, is running out of mana rather quickly if you're not within level. So in SMT5, just don't be under leveled ever if you want to have a good time. And to be fair, I would say of all the SMT games, this is the easiest one to just kinda go out and ignore the main quest, given how the game is laid out. Usually SMT games are fairly linear, usually most of the openness coming from how the dungeons are laid out, and while SMT5 still has a couple dungeons, it is much more of having an open area you can traverse through and do side quests and side objectives, while still having a little bit of that puzzle element that came from those dungeons in this space. And here it comes from this revolutionary, absolutely incredible and new feature to the SMT series in general, which is a jump button. I actually have no idea if this is the first SMT game to have a jump button, even out of the spin-offs, but Persona doesn't have one. Most of the other SMT crossovers are either dungeon crawlers or tactics games. Regardless though, what this means for SMT5 is an added level of verticality, and a lot of it. This is clear in the way that the maps are laid out. Usually a map will just be kind of an open area, but some parts of it may only be accessible through certain paths, meaning that you can't just do the shortest path between 2 points, which allows this game to, while still having this openness, to kind of control where you go, while keeping your level in check, as of course different areas will have different levels of monsters, and you'll be spending a lot of time in these open worlds. In my experience, to the degree where once you finish an area, you should be able to just kind of stomp through everyone in that area at that point, except for these really strong enemies that are laid out across the map. Usually they'll be linked to some kind of side quest, sometimes they kind of just hang around, and they're marked on the map by having basically an extra large enemy symbol. And usually the way it works is the first time you encounter one of these, you'll probably want to avoid it because he'll be a much higher level demon. This is one of those things where if you have played another SMT game, you may actually be able to tell how powerful these enemies are because you have some idea what their level might be. Speaking of recurring demons then, there is a lot of them here, like there is in every SMT game, even the spin-offs, but there also seem to be quite a lot of new ones from my experience. This is obviously a bit hard to talk about in a spoiler-free environment because most of these new demons are also used for the plot or are active in the plot at some point. Regardless of that though, I will say that in my opinion that the most striking ones are the humanoid looking ones. The character design here, from what I understand, was made by Masayuki Doi, who worked on other SMT games and also the early Persona series. And while I do miss Kazuma Kaneko's designs, especially for main characters, it is a situation where I do think they're both great artists and I'm not really complaining about the lack of one, and I don't think one is better than the other. As for the non-humanoid demons though, I will say there is quite a lot of redesigns here as well, or just kind of a cleanup of the art style, given there is quite a jump between this and 4, who was on the 3DS. But even from Persona 5, there is still quite a noticeable change in quality. That being said, in that case, it seems to be more of a way the characters are shaded than actual character detail, since of course Persona 5 had a very unique style to it, while SMT5 has more of a traditional SMT look. And speaking of that, I guess we can talk a little bit about the graphics. And the first thing to say is it's very reminiscent of Nocturne, taking place in a destroyed Tokyo, which 4 also takes place in, but there was a bit more of a twist on that one with its setting. But here there's quite a few things that can be directly compared to 3, but I am gonna talk about that a bit more in the story bit. But regardless, visually here we have a lot of desert in the ruins of Tokyo, with these ruins working quite well for some of the more platforming focused gameplay, which I already kind of mentioned. And I will say that it looks nice, but I do think a bit more variety could have helped here. While there are multiple areas, aside from the last one, they all very much blend in as this kind of desert area. And in fact, most of the difference between these areas seems to be more noticeable through the lighting or time of day, which I guess works for a game that mostly takes place always in the same city. And it's not like there isn't like moments of, very impressive visuals, but this also kind of brings up the problem that this game is stuck on the Switch. It does feel like it needs to be running on a bit of a more powerful system. While I don't mind the trade-offs done graphically to play portably, but I would rather have a higher quality version for when playing at home or on my TV or my computer. Once again, I'm not saying that it looks bad, I'm saying that I can see how this game could look so much better, even just running at a higher resolution. Speaking of portability though, I will say that even as a portable game, this game kinda has the problem of it just kinda sucks your battery completely. On my Switch, which is the original model, I can barely get 2 hours out of this without having to charge, so be aware. Use a power bank. That's what I've been kinda doing. Now, in terms of the story, I think this is quite important to talk about, but it is hard to talk about without spoiling. Obviously, being a Shin Megame Tensei game, it follows on the same footsteps of, the world is ending, we need a new god and kind of thing. If you played another SMT game, you know what this is about. And there's gonna be multiple paths. And this time around, the endings are mostly dictated by a choice at the end of the game, which isn't great, but I will say that in my selfish opinion, I kinda like that because it means I don't have to worry too much about what I do during the game to get my ending. Being said, it does diminish quite a lot of the importance of the dialogue and choices you can make throughout the game. In this game, you can be law all the way and then at the end of the game decide that actually I like chaos. At least that was my experience. Obviously I haven't beaten the game multiple times to find out. I simply have not had the time, even though I do really want to do it. This was the first time after I finished an SMT game that I was like, you know what, I want to go again. Which I think is very rare for me. I'm usually tired, I'm devastated after a playthrough of an SMT game, especially Nocturne. Regardless though, story overall, it is a lot more easy to understand. I would say in a lot of ways it's a more simplified version of 3, but with characters being a bit more developed and having a bit more nuance to them. That being said, characters here, much like other SMT games, exist more for some kind of philosophical debate rather than being actual characters, with the only one kind of branching out of this one being Ichiro Dazai. He's a very interesting character, he's definitely the most developed character in the whole game, and you can definitely understand why he takes the stances that he does throughout, which I think is a really good step. I wish they had done this to all the characters. But unfortunately, he kind of stands out as being the only one, really, which I think is always one of the main things that is very noticeable about Shin Megami Tensei, and that might be very surprising to newcomers to the series, especially people who come from the other spin-off that's very famous, I already mentioned it, who is a lot more focused on character-driven stories. Regardless though, if you are an SMT fan, then you know what you're getting into and you'll probably like it. And if you're not, be aware, it is much more a game about concepts than it is about characters, I guess would be the way to put it. Now, in terms of advice getting into this game, I will say that out of the SMT games, this is probably not the easiest one to get into. I would say that one is 4, since even though 4 has a much more dungeon crawler feel to it than even 3, it also has a lot more accessible options, making it play out more like said popular spin-off. That being said, if you have played any of the Persona games, I will say that Shin Megami Tensei is not a bad place to enter the SMT main series, because in that case you probably already have a good grasp on the mechanics of the games, and SMT is just kinda that on steroids. And also because you already played other games with similar mechanics, I would say that it also makes the beginning of this game, which is usually quite hard because you don't really know what demons to get or what demons to build, a bit easier while still not particularly easy. And that's about all I wanted to say about SMT5. I didn't want to make something too spoilery, especially since the game is still fairly new by the time this video comes out, and I do think you should experience it. You know, I was thinking that maybe this game isn't very welcoming to newcomers, but I guess no mainline SMT game is. Honestly, in my personal opinion, if you want to get into the SMT series, you should get into through the Persona series. I do think those games are more accessible to a wider audience, and they also teach you on the mechanics of SMT at the end of the day, which makes it easier once you try to transition. Regardless though, I really enjoyed my time with SMT5. I think it's an amazing game, and I'll be giving Shin Megami Tensei 5 an 8 out of 10. It might be a 9 someday if I decide to actually go back and play it again, and maybe, I don't know, who knows. Right now it's a really strong 8, and I hope that it does well and it maybe gets ported to other consoles. That would be nice. Regardless though, I hope that you enjoyed watching, and if so, please consider subscribing, liking, and commenting, all the things you can do for free here on YouTube. And regardless of that, I hope you're having a good day, and goodbye.